Hello everybody and welcome back. I have finished all the sheet metal for the rear end of the Caterpillar 988F and I'm going to go ahead and dive into those details right now. As a lot of you guys know, the rear end of the 988F is a lot bigger than the rear end of the B. That's because they put a bigger radiator in it and increased cooling for the bigger engine that was added to the F model. They also gave it a much bigger counterweight to add a little bit more stability for the increased lift capacity. So let's dive into what we got done here. So first and foremost, I needed to find a way to attach the frame part to the section of the old model that was going to hold the rear suspension. So I pinned it in place so that when I glue it in place later, it'll be a little bit more stable. I ended up finding that the original soldering job that I did to attach the base plate for the rear bumper wasn't very good. It ended up coming apart. So I redid it and then I ran some screws through as well to help reinforce the rear bumper of it. And the first iteration of this bumper didn't turn out quite great. It was a little too tall and not long enough. So I ended up ripping the old top piece off and then redoing the entire bumper. And I'm glad I redid it because I ended up getting the dimensions correct the second time around, and I was able to add some nice detail to the top of the bumper. You can see here, I was able to CNC in that sort of non-slip pattern that is on the top of the Real Machines bumper. And I was also able to add a spot for the tow hitch to go into. One of the biggest design challenges that I've encountered so far with the rear end of this project is the grille that sits over the top of the engine compartment, as well as the one that sits in front of the radiator. Now, creating a 1/50 scale grille is kind of tough, but I ended up creating a file, sending it to the CNC machine, and produced a pretty cool result that I'm quite pleased with. Yeah, that is really small scale for the size of the CNC machine that I have. I was also able to redo the panel that goes in the front of the engine compartment, which was important because the one on the F model actually sits at a straight up angle instead of canting back like the one that's on the B model. The next part to create was the side panels, or the hoods that flip up on the top of the engine. These ones don't actually flip up. I ended up making these out of two pieces because I wanted to make sure I had really squared corners where it attaches against the machine. These flare out because of the wider radiator that's on the F model. So creating them was definitely a bit of an exercise in geometry, but the results that I got came out pretty good. And I ended up doing a sort of pin system to help attach it to the side of the machine so that when I glue them in place later, there's a bit of added rigidity. You'll see that there's a little bit of an opening on the side of it. That's where a handle is going to get attached later. Again, these won't actually function in an upward flipping motion like the real one does, but I made sure to leave a gap between it and the other body panels so I can simulate hinges later. And then here you can see the last remaining engine panels for the rear end of the machine. These just open up and allow the operator or any maintenance personnel to access the radiator and other portions of the 988F model itself. I wanted to create it as a separate module that could slide on because that would aid me later in the painting process, because there's some smaller parts that are going to go in behind the grille at the rear end of the machine. And then the side panels that help cover the last remaining bits of the 988B donor model. You can see here just some angled pieces of brass with engine panels etched into them that drop in place to meet up with all the other panels. The CNC work that I'm most proud of is the rear radiator grille, and this one is even smaller and more precise than the one that goes over the top of the engine. Just to give you an idea, the space between the blades is 0.8 millimeters, and then the blades themselves are 0.2 millimeters. It took about 2.5 hours to CNC the entire thing, and then I dropped it into a metal frame, which I soldered it in place, and then it will fit here at the back of the model. I'll have created some other pieces to help secure that in place a little bit more at the end. Well, that's it for the episode, guys. I appreciate you bearing with me for the long gaps between video updates. I've been wanting to get larger chunks of this done before doing videos on it because a lot of it is kind of monotonous, but I definitely want to show you guys the progress and also the complicated CNC stuff that's been going into making the small parts. I'll see you guys on the next video, and we'll get to work on the boom and the bucket in that one. Take care. Adios.